The water looked deceptively calm that September morning in 1876, but Annabel Pierce knew better than to trust the Laramie River after the recent storms had swollen its banks. She stood at the edge of the crossing, her chestnut mare shifting nervously beneath her, and studied the currents with a practiced eye that had spent 22 years reading the landscape of Wyoming territory. The alternative route would add 3 hours to her journey back to town, and her father needed the medicine she carried in her saddlebags before nightfall. His fever had worsened through the night, and Doc Henderson had been adamant that the powders had to be administered by evening, or the infection might take a turn for the worse. 3 hours could mean the difference between recovery and something far more permanent. Annabel tightened her grip on the reins and urged her mare forward. The horse stepped into the water reluctantly, and for the first 50 feet, everything seemed manageable. The water rose to the mare's knees, then her belly, cold and swift but navigable. Annabel kept her boots lifted in the stirrups, her split riding skirt bunched around her thighs to keep it from getting soaked through. The saddlebags were secured high and tight, the precious medicine wrapped in oilcloth twice over. Then the river bottom dropped away. The mare stumbled, found no footing, and suddenly they were both swept sideways by a current that seemed to come from nowhere. Annabel felt the horse thrashing beneath her, felt the saddle slip, and then she was in the water, the cold punching the air from her lungs. She tried to grab for the mare's mane, but the current tore her away, spinning her like a leaf in a gale. The sky and water switched places, once, twice, and she surfaced gasping, her riding skirt now a sodden weight dragging her down. The roar of water filled her ears. She kicked hard, trying to keep her head above the surface, but the river had her now, pulling her toward where it widened and deepened near the bend. Her lungs burned. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her limbs heavy and clumsy. She caught a glimpse of the far bank, impossibly distant, and realized with sudden clarity that she was going to drown. Then she heard the splash of something large entering the water upstream, and a voice cut through the roar. "I've got you. Don't let go." A strong arm wrapped around her chest from behind, pulling her against something solid. Annabel grabbed instinctively at the arm, her fingers digging into rough fabric and hard muscle. The current still pushed at them both, but the grip around her was unyielding, and she felt the powerful kicks of someone who knew how to move through water. "I have you," the voice said again, close to her ear, steadier now. "Just breathe, I have got you." Annabel tried to help, tried to kick in rhythm with her rescuer, but her skirt was twisted around her legs and the cold had stolen most of her strength. She focused on breathing, on keeping her death grip on that arm, on not panicking even though every instinct screamed at her to fight. The man holding her adjusted his position, getting a better grip under her arms, and she felt the steady, powerful strokes that carried them both toward the far bank. The current fought them for every inch. Twice they were dragged sideways, and once they went under together, but that arm never loosened, never faltered. When Annabel surfaced coughing, the voice was there again, calm and certain. "Almost there. Stay with me." Her boots finally scraped against stones. The man hauled her forward, half carrying, half dragging her through the shallows until they collapsed together on the muddy bank. Annabel rolled onto her hands and knees, coughing up river water, her whole body shaking with cold and shock and relief. Beside her, her rescuer was breathing hard, water streaming from his clothes and hair. When she could finally lift her head and focus, she found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair plastered to his head and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His shirt clung to broad shoulders and a lean frame built from hard work, and his face had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He was watching her with an intensity that made her catch her breath for reasons that had nothing to do with her near drowning. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough from exertion. Annabel nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The man stood, water pouring from his clothes, and looked back across the river. Annabel followed his gaze and saw her mare on the opposite bank, reins trailing, the saddlebag still secure. Her heart sank. The medicine was over there and she was over here, and her father was running out of time. "Damn," she finally managed, the word coming out between shivers. The stranger looked down at her, then back at the river, and understanding crossed his face. "You need something from those saddlebags, medicine. For my father. He needs it by tonight." The man studied the river for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he shook his head. "Not going back across here. This current is only getting worse. There is a shallow crossing about 2 miles upstream, but we need to get you warmed up first before you freeze to death." "I don't have time," Annabel protested, struggling to her feet. Her legs nearly gave out, and the stranger caught her elbow, steadying her. "You do not have time to die of cold shock either," he said firmly. "My camp is just through those trees. 5 minutes to get warm, then we will figure out the rest." Annabel wanted to argue, but another violent shiver cut off her words. The man was already guiding her toward the tree line, his hand firm but gentle on her arm. She caught a better look at him as they walked and noticed the gun belt slung low on his hips, the well-worn boots, the way he moved with the easy confidence of someone who was comfortable in wild places. A cowboy, then, or a ranch hand. Maybe a drifter. His camp was indeed just beyond the trees, a neat setup with a small fire banked down to coals, a bedroll, and a horse tethered nearby. The horse, a big roan gelding, raised its head and nickered at their approach. The man led Annabel straight to the fire and quickly built it up, feeding in dry kindling until flames licked at larger pieces of wood. "Get close," he ordered, and Annabel did not argue. The heat felt like salvation. The man disappeared for a moment and returned with a wool blanket. "Your skirt is soaked. You need to get out of it." Annabel felt her face flush, but she was too cold and too practical to be missish about it. She turned her back and fumbled with the buttons, her numb fingers barely cooperating. After a moment, she felt him step closer. "Let me," he said quietly. She stood very still as he efficiently undid the buttons she could not manage, his fingers quick and impersonal. The heavy skirt fell away, leaving her in her damp chemise and petticoat. He handed her the blanket without looking at her directly, and she wrapped it around herself gratefully, then sank down near the fire. Her rescuer hung her skirt on a branch near the flames, then shed his own soaked shirt and hung it beside the skirt. His chest was lean and muscled, with a few pale scars that spoke of a hard life, and Annabel found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away. He caught the look and almost smiled, just a quirk at the corner of his mouth, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he poured coffee from a pot he had warming near the coals and handed her a tin cup. "Drink. It will help." Annabel wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the heat, and sipped. The coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. She drank half of it before she trusted herself to speak again. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "You saved my life." He shrugged, settling down across the fire from her. "Could not very well let you drown. Name is Yates. Yates Montgomery, Annabel Pierce." She took another sip of coffee. "I am from Laramie. My father owns the general store there." "Pierce," Yates repeated, and recognition flickered across his face. "I have heard the name. Passed through Laramie a few times, though I never stopped long. What brings you out here?" "Work. I have been up at the Mitchell Ranch for the past 2 months helping with a big cattle drive. Finished yesterday, and I am on my way to Cheyenne to look for the next job." He studied her over the rim of his own coffee cup. "What brings you out here alone? That crossing is dangerous even in good conditions." Annabel explained about her father's fever, about Doc Henderson sending her to the Anderson homestead, 10 miles west to borrow medicine they did not have in town, about the urgency of getting back before nightfall. Yates listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious. "How bad is he?" he asked when she finished. "Bad enough that the doc sent me out alone rather than wait for someone to accompany me. The fever started 3 days ago. At first we thought it was just a cold, but yesterday his arm swelled up where he cut it on a rusty nail last week. Infection." She swallowed hard, fighting against the fear that had been gnawing at her since early morning. "Doc Henderson said if the fever doesn't break soon, it could go to his blood." Yates was quiet for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. Then he set it down decisively. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. Your skirt will take too long to dry, and we don't have that kind of time. I have an extra pair of pants in my pack. They will be too big, but you can roll them up and use your belt. We will ride double up to that shallow crossing. Get your horse and medicine, and I will make sure you get back to Laramie before dark." "You don't have to do that," Annabel said, even though relief washed through her at the offer. "You have already done more than enough, and Cheyenne is in the opposite direction." "Cheyenne is not going anywhere," Yates said simply. He was already rummaging in his pack, pulling out a pair of worn work pants. "And like I said, I can't very well save you from drowning just to let your father die because you could not get home in time. Besides, it is the right thing to do." He tossed her the pants and turned his back to give her privacy. Annabel let the blanket drop and pulled them on quickly. They were indeed too large, hanging loose at the waist and pooling around her feet, but her belt cinched them tight enough, and she rolled the cuffs several times. The fabric was still warm from his pack, and she caught the faint scent of leather and wood smoke and something else, something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way she had no time to examine. "Ready," she said, and Yates turned back around. His eyes traveled over her once, and something flickered in them before he schooled his expression to neutrality. "Those look better on you than they ever did on me," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her face warm. He pulled his still damp shirt back on, grimacing at the cold fabric, and quickly broke camp. Within minutes, everything was packed and secured on his roan, and he was helping Annabel up into the saddle. She scooted forward to give him room, and he swung up behind her, reaching around her for the reins. His chest pressed against her back, solid and warm even through the damp shirt, and Annabel felt every place they touched with an awareness that was entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. If Yates noticed, he gave no sign. He nudged the roan into a steady trot, and they moved through the trees parallel to the river, heading upstream. The rhythm of the horse's gait pressed them together with every stride, and Annabel found herself hyper-aware of his arms on either side of her, of the easy competence with which he guided the horse through rough terrain, of the warmth radiating from him that was slowly thawing the lingering chill from her bones. "You ride well," she said, mostly to break the silence that was growing too charged for comfort. "Been on horses since I was old enough to sit up," Yates replied. "My father had a ranch in Texas before the war, lost it afterward like a lot of folks. Been drifting since I was 16, working where I can find it." "That must be hard, never staying in one place." She felt him shrug behind her. "It is what I know. Freedom in it, too, no one to answer to but yourself, no ties to hold you down when things go sour." There was something in his voice, some old hurt carefully buried, but Annabel did not press. They had known each other less than an hour. She had no right to his old wounds. The shallow crossing appeared just as Yates had promised, a wide stretch where the river spread out over a bed of stones and gravel, the water running fast but only a foot or so deep. Yates guided the roan across carefully, testing each step, and they made it to the other side without incident. Annabel's mare was grazing 100 yards downstream, trailing her reins, and she nickered when she saw them approach. Yates dismounted first, then helped Annabel down, his hands strong around her waist. She caught his gaze for just a moment, saw something intense and searching in his eyes, then he released her and went to catch the mare. The horse came to him easily enough, and Yates checked her over with practiced efficiency, running his hands down her legs, checking her hooves. She seems all right. A little shaken, maybe, but sound. Annabel quickly checked the saddlebags, relief flooding through her when she found the wrapped packets of medicine intact and dry. "Thank you," she said again, pressing her hand to her chest where her heart was still racing. "I don't know what I would have done if you had not been there." "You would have figured something out," Yates said, handing her the mare's reins. "You strike me as the resourceful type." There was admiration in his voice, and it made something flutter in Annabel's chest. She busied herself securing the saddlebags more tightly to avoid looking at him. "Can you ride in those pants?" Yates asked, nodding at the oversized trousers she wore. "I will manage." She gathered the reins and put her foot in the stirrup, pulling herself up. The pants were awkward, bunching in strange places, but she settled into the saddle and felt reasonably secure. Yates mounted his own horse, and they set off together toward Laramie. The sun was past its peak, sliding toward the western horizon. Annabel judged they had perhaps 5 hours of good daylight left, and Laramie was a solid 3 hours away if they pushed. It would be close, but manageable. They rode in silence for the first mile, the horses settling into an easy canter that ate up the distance. The land rolled out around them in shades of gold and brown. The late summer grass baked almost white by the sun, clusters of sagebrush dotting the hills. In the distance, the mountains rose blue and hazy, their peaks still holding patches of last winter's snow. It was country Annabel had known her entire life, but seeing it now with Yates Montgomery beside her, she felt like she was seeing it fresh. "How long has it been since you have been through Laramie?" she asked, guiding her mare around a patch of loose rock. 2 years, maybe 3. "Stopped there on my way north to Montana. Did not stay more than a night." He glanced at her, the sun catching his eyes and turning them golden. "I remember it as a decent town. Growing fast last I saw, lots of folks moving in hoping to make their fortune." "It is still growing," Annabel confirmed. "The railroad helped. We get regular freight now and travelers passing through. My father's store does good business, especially with the ranches around here." She paused, then added quietly, "He built that business from nothing. Came out here in '67 with my mother and me, right after the war. He had $50 and a wagon full of hope. And now he has the biggest general store between Cheyenne and Rawlins, a house with real glass windows and enough put aside that we do not worry about hard winters." Pride crept into her voice. "He is a good man, a fair man. He deserves better than dying from a rusty nail." Yates was quiet for a moment. "He will be all right," he said finally, and there was a certainty in his voice that eased something tight in Annabel's chest. "We are making good time. You will get that medicine to him, and he will be all right." Annabel wanted to believe him. She let herself believe him just for a moment and felt the knot of fear loosen slightly. They pushed on, stopping only once to water the horses at a small creek. Yates dismounted and helped Annabel down again, his hands lingering at her waist just a fraction longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Annabel felt that flutter again, stronger this time, like birds taking flight inside her rib cage. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it." Yates smiled, a real smile this time that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger, less guarded. "You are welcome, Annabel Pierce, but you do not need to keep thanking me. I am just doing what any decent person would do. Not everyone would jump into a flooding river for a stranger. Maybe I am not everyone." The words hung between them, loaded with something unspoken, and Annabel felt her breath catch. Yates held her gaze for another heartbeat, then turned away to tend to his horse, breaking the moment. When they remounted, the sun was noticeably lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. They pushed the horses harder now, moving from a canter to a gallop across open stretches, slowing only when the terrain demanded it. The miles disappeared beneath the horses' hooves, and the landscape gradually shifted from open range to the outlying homesteads that marked the approach to Laramie. They saw the town just as the sun touched the horizon, its buildings dark silhouettes against the burning sky. Annabel felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly brought tears to her eyes. They were going to make it. Laramie was bustling with evening activity as they rode in. People turned to look at them, curiosity plain on their faces. Annabel realized what they must look like. Her in oversized men's pants, both of them with clothes still bearing the marks of their river misadventure, riding together like fugitives or lovers or both. She ignored the stares and headed straight for the general store on Main Street. Her father's store was a large building with a wide porch and big windows displaying everything from farm implements to fine fabrics. Annabel swung down from her mare before the horse had fully stopped, grabbed the saddlebags, and ran inside. The store was dim, lit only by a few lamps in the back. Mrs. Chen, their neighbor who often helped out, looked up from where she was sweeping the floor. "Annabel, thank goodness. Your father has been asking for you. The doctor is upstairs with him now." Annabel took the stairs 2 at a time, Yates following close behind. The living quarters above the store were small but comfortable, and she found her father in his bedroom, Doc Henderson bent over him with a stethoscope. Her father, Samuel Pierce, was a large man gone gaunt with illness, his face flushed with fever, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Papa," Annabel said, moving to his bedside, "I have the medicine." Doc Henderson straightened, relief washing over his lined face. "Thank God. Give it here, quickly." Annabel unwrapped the packets with shaking hands and passed them to the doctor. Henderson mixed the powder in water and got Samuel to drink it, holding his head up gently. When the cup was empty, he laid Samuel back down and turned to Annabel. "You made it just in time. Another few hours and I don't know that these would have done much good. As it is, if the fever breaks by morning, he should pull through." Annabel felt her knees go weak with relief. Yates was suddenly there beside her, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. Doc Henderson noticed him for the first time and raised his eyebrows. "Who is your friend?" "This is Yates Montgomery. He saved my life today." Annabel quickly explained what had happened at the river, and as she spoke, she saw her father's eyes focus on Yates with an awareness that had been absent before. "Thank you," Samuel rasped, his voice rough. "My daughter is everything I have." "If you had not been there." "But I was," Yates said simply. "And she is safe and you are going to recover. That is what matters." Samuel studied him for a long moment, then nodded weakly before his eyes drifted closed again. Doc Henderson shooed them out of the room. "Let him rest. The medicine needs time to work. Annabel, you should get cleaned up and get some rest yourself. You have had quite a day." He looked at Yates. "And you, young man, should find a hot meal and a bed. I imagine you could use both. Yates nodded. I will find the hotel. You will do no such thing, Annabel said firmly. You will stay here. We have a guest room, and it is the least we can offer after what you did today. Yates looked like he might argue, but something in Annabel's expression must have convinced him. All right, thank you, Mrs. Chen had heard everything from the bottom of the stairs and immediately bustled into action, heating water for baths and rummaging up towels, and a spare set of clothes that had belonged to Samuel before his illness had wasted him. The clothes would be too big on Yates, but they were clean and dry, and that was what mattered. Annabel bathed first in the small washroom, scrubbing the river from her skin and hair, feeling the events of the day catch up with her all at once. Her arms ached from fighting the current. Her lungs felt raw from coughing up water. And underneath it all was the persistent memory of Yates's arm around her, his voice in her ear, steady and certain. I have got you. Don't let go. She dressed in clean clothes, a simple calico dress and petticoat, and braided her damp hair over one shoulder. When she emerged, she found Yates waiting his turn, and their eyes met across the narrow hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yates smiled, that small, almost smile of his. You look better, he said. So will you once you get cleaned up. The water is still hot. He disappeared into the washroom, and Annabel went downstairs to help Mrs. Chen prepare supper. Her hands moved automatically through familiar tasks, slicing bread, setting the table, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying the day, kept feeling that moment when the current had her, and she thought she was going to die, kept hearing Yates's voice cutting through her panic. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look. He is very handsome, your rescuer. Annabel felt her face heat. Mrs. Chen. What? I am old, not blind, and the way he looks at you, like you are the only person in the room, you could do worse. I have known him for all of 6 hours. Sometimes 6 hours is enough. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. Your father will see it too once he is thinking clearly again. A man who jumps into a flooding river for a stranger is not a common thing. Annabel wanted to protest, to say that Yates was just passing through, that he would be gone to Cheyenne as soon as he made sure she was all right, that there was no point in thinking of him as anything more than a brief and dramatic acquaintance. But the words would not come, because some part of her, some part she had not known existed until today, did not want him to leave. Yates came downstairs clean and dressed in Samuel's borrowed clothes, which hung loose on his leaner frame but were serviceable enough. His dark hair was still damp, combed back from his face, and without the dust and grime of travel. Annabel could see the clean lines of his features, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners like he smiled more than his serious demeanor suggested. They ate supper together at the small kitchen table, a simple meal of stew and bread, but it was warm and filling and exactly what they both needed. Yates ate with the methodical efficiency of someone who had spent too many meals cold and on the trail, but he was careful with his manners, aware that he was a guest in a family's home. Tell me about Texas, Annabel said, wanting to hear him talk, wanting to know more about this man who had appeared in her life like a character from one of the adventure novels she secretly read. Yates set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair. Texas is big. Bigger than you can imagine if you have not been there. Sky goes on forever, and the land is flat enough that you can see tomorrow coming at you. It is hot and dry and beautiful in a harsh sort of way. His expression softened with memory. My father's ranch was in the hill country, greener than the rest. We raised cattle and horses, had a good herd. I thought I would spend my whole life there, take over when my father got too old to run it. What happened? War happened. My father and older brother went off to fight for the Confederacy. I was too young, only 12 when it started. They both came back, but the ranch did not survive. Carpetbaggers and taxes and bad years all piled up. We lost it in '67. My father could not take it. He had put everything into that land. He died a year later, just gave up. My brother went east to try his luck in the cities. I went west. He picked up his spoon again. Been west ever since. Do you miss it, having a place that is yours? Yates was quiet for a long time. Sometimes, he finally said. But missing something and being able to have it are different things. I have gotten used to moving on, maybe too used to it. Annabel heard the loneliness in his words, the careful resignation of someone who had convinced himself that wanting things only led to disappointment. It made her heart ache for him in a way that was entirely too intense for someone she had just met. Doc Henderson appeared in the doorway before she could respond. Your father's fever is down slightly. Not much, but enough that I am cautiously optimistic. Keep him comfortable tonight, give him more medicine in 4 hours, and send for me if anything changes. I will be back first thing in the morning. Annabel walked the doctor to the door, thanking him profusely. When she returned to the kitchen, Yates was helping Mrs. Chen clear the dishes. You do not have to do that, Annabel said. I know, but I want to help. It was such a simple statement, but it carried weight. Mrs. Chen excused herself, heading home to her own family, and suddenly, Annabel and Yates were alone in the quiet kitchen. Annabel lit a few more lamps, pushing back the darkness, and they finished the dishes together in comfortable silence. You should get some rest, Yates said when the last plate was dried and put away. It has been a long day for you, for both of us. Annabel hung up the dish towel and turned to face him. They were standing close in the small kitchen, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. I know I keep saying this, but thank you for everything, for saving me, for bringing me home, for staying. You did not have to do any of it. Maybe I wanted to. Yates reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, and Annabel felt that touch like lightning through her entire body. Maybe I am glad I was there today, even if I wish you had not been in danger in the first place. Maybe I am glad too, Annabel whispered. Is that terrible, to be glad for something that could have killed me, just because it brought you into my life? I don't think it is terrible at all. They stood there, close enough to kiss, the moment stretching out between them charged and electric. Annabel could see the want in his eyes, could feel the answering want in herself, but something held them both back. It was too soon, too fast, too much all at once. Yates stepped back first, clearing his throat. We should both get some rest. Tomorrow is another day. Annabel nodded, not trusting her voice. She showed him to the guest room, a small space with a narrow bed and a washstand, and bid him good night. In her own room across the hall, she lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the building settling, to her father's labored breathing in the next room, to her own heart beating too fast. She thought about Yates Montgomery, about the way he had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him most, about the careful walls he kept around himself, and the glimpses she had caught of the man behind them. She thought about the way his hand had felt on her cheek, about the want in his eyes that matched her own. And she thought about the fact that he would leave soon, that men like Yates always left, and that she was in serious danger of losing her heart to someone who had never learned how to stay. Morning came too early and too bright. Annabel woke to sun streaming through her window and the sound of voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and went to check on her father first. Samuel was sleeping peacefully, his breathing easier, his fever visibly reduced. Relief flooded through her. Doc Henderson had been right. The medicine was working. Downstairs, She found Yates and Mrs. Chen making breakfast together, the older woman chattering away while Yates worked on scrambling eggs with the careful focus of someone performing an unfamiliar task. He looked up when Annabel entered and smiled, a real smile this time, warm and open. "Morning. How is your father?" "Better. Much better." Annabel accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Chen pressed into her hands. "The fever has broken." "Thank God," Mrs. Chen said, making a sign across her chest. "We have all been so worried. Your father is a good man, a pillar of this community. Laramie needs him." Doc Henderson arrived shortly after breakfast and confirmed what Annabel already knew. Samuel was out of danger. He would need rest and continued medication for a few more days, but he would make a full recovery. "You can thank your daughter for that," the doctor told Samuel, who was awake now and looking more like himself. "She risked her life to get you that medicine." "And she nearly died in the process," Samuel said, his gaze moving to Yates. "Young man, come here." Yates approached the bedside and Samuel held out his hand. Yates took it, and Samuel gripped it firmly despite his weakness. "My daughter tells me you saved her life without hesitation, that you went out of your way to help her when you could have just as easily ridden on. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You do not owe me anything, sir. I am just glad I was there." Samuel studied him with the sharp eyes of a successful merchant who had built a business on reading people. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded. "Stay in Laramie for a while. I could use a man like you in my store, someone strong and trustworthy. The pay is fair, and there is a room above the stables you can use." Yates looked surprised. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I was planning to move on to Cheyenne." "Plans change." Samuel glanced at Annabel, then back to Yates. "At least think about it. Give it a few days. You have been drifting for a long time, son. Maybe it is time to see what it is like to stay put for a while." Annabel held her breath, not daring to hope. She had no right to want him to stay, no claim on him at all, but the thought of him leaving made something in her chest ache. Yates was quiet for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "A few days. I can give it a few days." Those few days stretched into a week, then two. Yates proved to be a natural at the store work, his honesty and calm demeanor making him popular with customers. He was strong enough to lift the heavy loads that Samuel could not yet manage, smart enough to calculate prices and manage inventory, and personable enough that people trusted him. And every day, he and Annabel grew closer. It happened in small moments. The way their hands would brush when passing items across the counter. The way Yates would catch her eye across the store and smile. The way they would sit together in the evenings after the store closed, talking about everything and nothing while Samuel recovered upstairs. Annabel learned that Yates could read and write, unusual for a drifting cowboy, because his mother had been a schoolteacher before her marriage. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, that he was kind to animals and children, that he had a deep sense of fairness that made him quietly angry at injustice. Yates learned that Annabel was smarter than many people gave her credit for, that she handled most of the store's bookkeeping and had ideas for expansion that her father was starting to implement. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher herself once, but had given it up to help her father after her mother died 5 years ago. He learned that she loved books and horses and thunderstorms, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she believed she was right. And underneath all those discoveries, the attraction between them grew stronger, harder to ignore. It came to a head 3 weeks after the river incident. Samuel was mostly recovered by then, back to working in the store for a few hours each day, and he had formally offered Yates a permanent position. Yates still had not given his answer, and Annabel could see the war going on behind his eyes, the pull between his instinct to drift and something else, something new that was taking root in Laramie. That evening, Annabel and Yates walked together to the edge of town, ostensibly to check on a delivery that had come in at the freight office, but really just to be alone together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air had the first cool kiss of autumn in it. "You are going to leave, are not you?" Annabel said quietly as they walked. It was not really a question. Yates did not answer right away. They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and he stopped walking, turning to face her. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Part of me wants to stay more than I have wanted anything in a long time. But another part is scared that if I stay, if I let myself want this, it will all fall apart like everything else I have tried to hold on to." "What if it does not?" Annabel stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "What if this is different? What if you are allowed to have something good, something that lasts? What if I am not?" The pain in his voice was raw. "What if I stay and lose it all anyway, or worse? What if I let you believe in me and I let you down? You could never let me down." Annabel reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palm, feeling him lean into her touch. "Yates, I know we have not known each other long. I know this is happening fast, but I also know that what I feel for you is real. I have never felt anything like this before, and I do not want to lose it. I do not want to lose you." Annabel. Her name on his lips was somewhere between a prayer and a curse. "If I stay, if I let myself love you, I am not sure I will know how to do it right. I have been alone for so long. Then we will figure it out together." She was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks, and she did not care. "Please stay. Please give us a chance." Yates closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "I am scared," he admitted. "So am I. But I would rather be scared with you than safe without you." That broke something in him. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was everything a first kiss should be, desperate and tender and full of promise. Annabel kissed him back with everything in her, pouring all her hope and fear and love into it, feeling him do the same. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I will stay," he whispered. "I will stay, and I will try, and God help me, I will do everything I can to be the man you deserve. You already are." Annabel kissed him again, softer this time. "You already are." They walked back to town hand in hand, and when Samuel saw them come into the store together, saw the way they looked at each other, he smiled knowingly. "I take it you are accepting my offer?" he asked Yates. "Yes, sir, if it still stands." "It stands. Welcome to the family, son." Over the following months, Yates settled into life in Laramie in a way he had never settled anywhere before. He moved into the room above the stables, but spent most of his time at the store or with Annabel. He proved invaluable to the business, taking on more and more responsibility as Samuel continued to recover. The townspeople came to know and trust him, and he formed friendships that he had not realized he was missing during his years of drifting. But most importantly, he let himself love Annabel, and he let her love him back. They courted properly, by the standards of the time. He would call on her in the evenings, and they would sit on the porch and talk until the stars came out. He would walk her home from church on Sundays, carrying her Bible and making her laugh with quiet observations. He would help her with deliveries, and she would help him with the bookkeeping, and slowly they built a life together, one small moment at a time. Samuel watched it all with approval and growing affection for the young man who had saved his daughter, and then stayed to win her heart. He could see that Yates was good for Annabel, that he challenged her and supported her in equal measure, that he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. 6 months after the river incident, on a mild March evening in 1877, Yates asked Samuel for permission to marry Annabel. Samuel gave it without hesitation, and Yates proposed that same night. They were at their spot on the edge of town, watching the sun set like they had that first evening when everything changed. Yates got down on one knee, pulled out a simple gold band he had saved up for, and asked Annabel Pierce to be his wife. "I know I am not much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not have land or wealth or family connections. But I can promise you that I will love you with everything I have, every day for the rest of my life. I will work hard to give you a good life, to build something lasting with you. And I will never stop being grateful that the river brought me to you." Annabel was crying again, tears of joy this time. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, yes, yes." The wedding took place 2 months later in May when the wildflowers were blooming across the Wyoming hills. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Laramie, with half the town in attendance. Annabel wore a dress of cream silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Yates wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but he looked handsome and proud as he waited at the altar for his bride. When Annabel walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Yates felt his throat close up with emotion. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her, and the fact that she had chosen him, that she wanted to spend her life with him, still felt like a miracle he did not quite deserve. They said their vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Annabel like it was both the first and last time, like he wanted to memorize the moment forever. The reception was held at the largest saloon in town, which had been cleaned up and decorated for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing, and Yates danced with his new wife until his feet hurt and his face ached from smiling. It was the happiest day of his life, and he let himself feel it fully, let himself believe that this was real and lasting and his. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift away, Annabel leaned close to Yates and whispered, "Take me home." Home was a small house at the edge of town that Samuel had purchased for them as a wedding gift. It was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor, and it was theirs. Yates carried Annabel over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in their bedroom. The laughter faded as they looked at each other, suddenly aware that they were alone, that they were married, that everything had changed. Yates reached out and cupped Annabel's face in his hands, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "I love you," he said, and the words were easier now, no longer unfamiliar or frightening. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Annabel replied, covering his hands with hers. "And you do not need to be terrified anymore. I am not going anywhere. We are in this together now, for better or worse. I am planning on mostly better. Good plan." They came together then, tender and careful with each other, learning and exploring and loving. It was not perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real and honest and full of emotion. Afterward they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, skin to skin, heart to heart. "You ever think about that day at the river?" Annabel asked, her fingers tracing patterns on Yates's chest. "All the time. It was the day my life started making sense." "Mine too." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Do you ever regret it, jumping in after me, staying here instead of drifting?" Yates pulled her back down against him, holding her close. "Never, not once. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Annabel Montgomery. I would jump into 1,000 rivers if it meant ending up here with you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe and warm and together. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after the wedding. Yates and Annabel ran the store together while Samuel gradually stepped back, content to let the younger generation take over. They were good at it, complementing each other's strengths. Yates handled the physical labor and the purchasing, while Annabel managed the books and the customer relationships. Under their management, the store continued to grow and prosper. But more than the business success, they built a life together. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to fight fair and make up thoroughly, learned how to support each other through bad days and celebrate good ones. Yates learned to let himself be vulnerable, to trust that Annabel would not leave when things got hard. Annabel learned to give him space when he needed it, understanding that years of solitude had left him needing quiet moments to recharge. A year and a half after their wedding, in late 1878, Annabel discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, too excited to wait for a perfect moment. She just blurted it out while they were doing dishes together. "I am going to have a baby." Yates dropped the plate he was holding. It hit the edge of the sink and cracked in half, but he did not seem to notice. He just stared at Annabel with an expression of such pure joy and terror that she almost laughed. "Are you sure?" Doc Henderson confirmed it this afternoon. "I am about 2 months along. The baby should come in late May or early June." Yates sat down heavily in the nearest chair, looking dazed. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." Annabel knelt beside him, taking his hands. "Are you all right? You look like you might faint." "I am better than all right. I am just overwhelmed. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a family. I never let myself want it because I did not think it was possible for someone like me." He pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. Thank you for giving me this life." "We gave it to each other," Annabel corrected, kissing him softly. "We built this together." The pregnancy was not easy. Annabel was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Yates hovered anxiously, trying to help and mostly just getting in the way. But as the months passed, and Annabel's belly grew round with their child, a sense of anticipation and wonder settled over them both. Yates found himself thinking about his own father, about the ranch in Texas, and the life he had thought he would have. He found himself hoping that he could be the kind of father his own had been before the war broke him, strong and patient and loving. He wanted to build something for his child, something lasting that could not be taken away by bad luck or hard times. He started looking at land outside of town, thinking about the future. Samuel noticed and, in his quiet way, began putting aside money to help them when they were ready to buy. The baby came on a hot night in early June 1879. Doc Henderson was called, and Annabel labored through the night while Yates paced the parlor downstairs, running his hands through his hair and trying not to panic at every sound from above. Samuel sat with him, calm and reassuring, telling stories about Annabel's own birth to distract him. Just before dawn, the thin cry of a newborn cut through the air, and Yates nearly fell over himself getting up the stairs. Doc Henderson met him at the bedroom door with a tired smile. "You have a son, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine, just exhausted." Yates pushed past him into the bedroom. Annabel was propped up against pillows, sweaty and pale but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up as he entered and her smile widened. "Come meet your son." Yates approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Annabel pulled back the blanket, revealing a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, his mouth open in another demanding cry. "He has good lungs," Doc Henderson said dryly from behind them. Yates reached out with one finger and touched the baby's hand. Impossibly small fingers immediately wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength, and something in Yates's chest cracked wide open. This was his son. his child. A piece of him and Annabel, alive and perfect and completely dependent on them. What should we name him? Annabel asked softly. Yates thought about it for a moment. Thomas, after my father. Thomas Samuel Montgomery. It is perfect. Annabel looked down at their son with such love that Yates felt his eyes burn with tears. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife. And together, they looked at their child and marveled at what they had created. Outside, the sun was rising over Laramie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Yates felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had been drifting for so long, moving from place to place with no anchor, no reason to stay. And then he had jumped into a river after a drowning woman, and everything changed. He found a home, a family, a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. Life continued to unfold in the years that followed. Thomas grew from an infant to a rambunctious toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp eyes. He was bright and curious and full of energy, and he adored both his parents with the wholehearted devotion of a child. When Thomas was 3, Annabel became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara after Annabel's mother, was born in the spring of 1883. She was smaller and quieter than Thomas had been, with strawberry blonde hair and a serious expression that made her look like a tiny adult. By then, Yates and Annabel had saved enough to buy a piece of land just outside Laramie. It was not huge, but it was theirs. 40 acres with good water and grassland suitable for horses and a small herd of cattle. Yates built a house there with his own hands, a sturdy structure that would last generations. They kept the store in town, but the ranch became their home, the place where they raised their children and built their future. Samuel was overjoyed to have grandchildren. He doted on Thomas and Clara, spoiling them shamelessly and telling them stories about their mother's childhood and about the cowboy who had saved her life and won her heart. The children loved their grandfather and spent hours at the store with him, learning the business that would one day be part of their inheritance. As the years passed, Yates became one of the most respected men in Laramie. He served on the town council, helped settle disputes, and was known for his fairness and quiet integrity. People who remembered him as a drifter cowboy with nothing to his name now sought his advice and valued his opinion. He had become exactly what he had never thought possible: a pillar of the community, a family man, someone with roots and responsibilities and reasons to stay. But despite all the success and respect, his favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Evenings on the porch with Annabel after the children were asleep, watching the stars come out. Sunday dinners with Samuel and the extended family they had built around them. Teaching Thomas to ride and rope. Reading to Clara before bed. Walking out to check the horses with Annabel beside him, her hand in his, comfortable in the silence. One summer evening in 1888, when Thomas was 9 and Clara was 5, the family went on a picnic down by the river. It was a different spot than where Yates had pulled Annabel from the water all those years ago, but the river was the same, flowing eternal through the Wyoming landscape. The children played in the shallows while Yates and Annabel sat on the bank watching them. Annabel leaned against Yates, his arm around her shoulders, both of them relaxed and content. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not been there that day?" Annabel asked. It was a question she had asked before in various forms over the years. "All the time," Yates admitted. "And then I stop thinking about it because it makes me feel sick. I can't imagine my life without you, without all of this. I was so scared that day, not just of drowning, but of everything." My father was dying, I was alone, and the water just kept pulling me under. And then you were there and you said, I have got you, don't let go, and I believed you. I knew somehow that if I held on, everything would be all right. You did hold on. We both did. Annabel turned to look at him, her eyes soft with emotion. I would do it all again, you know, the fear, the danger, all of it, because it brought me to you. Me too. Yates kissed her temple. Best decision I ever made, jumping into that river. Thomas came running up then, dripping wet and grinning. Papa, can you teach me to swim properly? Clara is scared of the deep water, but I want to learn. Yates looked at his son, at this confident, happy child who had never known what it was like to have nothing, to drift aimlessly, to be afraid of wanting things. He thought about the river and what it had taken from him and what it had given him, and he smiled. I can teach you. But you have to promise me something first. If you ever see someone in trouble, someone who needs help, you jump in without thinking. You hear me? You do not hesitate, you do not worry about yourself, you help. That is what we do. Thomas nodded seriously, understanding that this was important. I promise, Papa. Good boy. Yates stood and took his son's hand. Come on, let us start with the basics. He waded into the river with Thomas, Annabel, and Clara watching from the bank and began teaching his son the lessons that had once saved Annabel's life. As he guided Thomas through the strokes, feeling the current push against them both, he thought about how far he had come from that lonely drifter who had been ready to ride past Laramie without a second thought. Sometimes the current swept you away from everything you knew. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it swept you exactly where you needed to be. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of a life well lived. Samuel Pierce passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1891, surrounded by family, having lived long enough to see his grandchildren grow and his business flourish beyond his wildest dreams. They buried him on a hill overlooking Laramie, and Yates mourned the loss of the man who had become the father he had needed, the man who had given him a chance when he was just a drifter with nothing to offer but a willingness to work. The store passed to Annabel and Yates officially then, though they had been running it for years. Thomas, now 12, started working there after school, learning the business from the ground up just as his mother had. Clara, at 8, was more interested in the ranch, preferring horses and open space to the confines of town. Yates made sure both children learned both sides of the business, believing that knowledge was its own kind of wealth. In 1893, Annabel became pregnant once more, a surprise after a decade since Clara's birth. She was 39 now, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones had been. Yates worried constantly, hovering even more than he had with their first child, but Annabel took it in stride. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she reminded him when he tried to insist she stay in bed. I am not made of glass, Yates Montgomery. I know, but you are precious to me and I am allowed to worry. The baby, another boy they named Samuel after Annabel's father, arrived healthy and squalling in early spring of 1894. Thomas and Clara were fascinated by their new brother, taking turns holding him under Annabel's watchful eye and arguing over who got to help feed him. Life settled once more, the rhythm changing to accommodate an infant in the house again. Yates was older now, 42, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting against the sun. But he was happy in a way he had never imagined possible during his drifting years. He had everything he had been afraid to want: a wife he loved deeply, children who filled his life with joy and chaos, land that was his, a business that provided well, and a community that respected him. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, and he and Annabel sat together on the porch of their ranch house, Yates would sometimes think back to that morning when he had been camped by the river, planning to ride on to Cheyenne. He thought about how close he had come to missing everything, to riding past Annabel's struggle and continuing his lonely journey. The thought always made him reach for his wife's hand, needing the reassurance of her touch. "What are you thinking about?" Annabel would ask, because she always knew when his mind drifted to the past. "Just how lucky I am," he would reply. And she would smile and lean against him, and they would sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over Wyoming. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a good head for business and a natural way with people. At 18, he took over much of the store's daily operations, freeing Yates and Annabel to focus more on the ranch. He courted and eventually married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible young woman named Margaret, and they began building their own life in a house near the store. Clara, at 14, was as comfortable on horseback as most men twice her age. She had her mother's stubborn independence and her father's quiet integrity, and Yates knew she would grow into a force to be reckoned with. She had already declared that she wanted to expand the ranch, to breed horses properly and make a name for the Montgomery Ranch in Wyoming territory. Young Samuel, at 5, was the family charmer, with curly dark hair and a smile that could get him out of any trouble. He worshipped his older brother and trailed after his sister constantly, wanting to be included in everything. In 1899, Wyoming officially became a state, no longer just a territory, and Laramie celebrated with parades and speeches and grand declarations about the future. Yates and Annabel stood with their children watching the festivities, part of the community that was shaping this new state, this new century that was just around the corner. "We helped build this," Annabel said, her hand in Yates's. "We were part of making this place what it is." "You were part of it long before I came along," Yates corrected. "But you stayed. You put down roots. You helped build our family, our business, our community. You matter here, Yates. You have always mattered." Yates pulled her close, not caring who saw the public display of affection. After more than 20 years of marriage, he was long past being embarrassed about showing his love for his wife. "I matter because you gave me a reason to," he said quietly. "Before you, I was just drifting. I didn't matter to anyone, least of all myself." "That is not true. You mattered. You just didn't know it yet." As the new century dawned in 1900, the Montgomery family was firmly established as one of the leading families in Laramie. The store had expanded twice, now occupying an entire city block. The ranch had grown to 200 acres, with a breeding program for horses that was gaining recognition throughout the state. Thomas and Margaret had given Yates and Annabel their first grandchild, a daughter named Annabel after her grandmother. Yates was 51 now, his hair more silver than brown, his body bearing the marks of years of hard work. But he was still strong, still capable, still the steady presence his family and community depended on. And he was still deeply, completely in love with his wife. Annabel, at 48, had aged gracefully, her beauty settling into something deeper and more lasting than mere youth. Her hair had streaks of silver too, and her hands bore the marks of decades of work, but to Yates she was as beautiful as the day he had pulled her from the river. More beautiful, perhaps, because now he knew every part of her. Her strength, her kindness, her sharp mind, her generous heart. One evening in the summer of 1901, they took a ride out to the spot where it had all begun, the place where the Laramie River had nearly taken Annabel's life and instead given them both a future. They had not been there together in years, but something drew them back, a need to revisit the place where their story started. The river was calm that day, running low in the summer heat, nothing like the raging current of that September morning 25 years ago. They dismounted and stood on the bank, hand in hand, looking at the water. "You remember?" Annabel asked. "Every detail. The sound of the water, the cold, the way you grabbed my arm like you would never let go. The way you looked at me when we made it to shore, soaked and exhausted and alive." Yates turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I remember thinking you were the most courageous person I had ever met. You still are. I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You did that. And then you trusted me, a complete stranger, to help you save your father. You let me into your life, into your heart. That took courage too." Annabel smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "You made it easy. You were so steady, so certain. When you said, 'I have got you, don't let go,' I believed you. And you have had me ever since. You have never let go." "Never will," Yates promised. He pulled her close and kissed her the same way he had that first evening when she asked him to stay, when everything began to change. The kiss was familiar now, comfortable and deep with years of love and intimacy, but it still made his heart race. When they pulled apart, Annabel laughed softly. "We are too old to be carrying on like newlyweds," says who. "I am going to be carrying on with you until I am too old to remember my own name, and probably even after that." They stood there for a while longer, watching the river flow past, thinking about all the years behind them and all the years still to come. They had built something lasting, something real, from a single moment of crisis and connection. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, that sometimes you had to nearly lose everything to find what really mattered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they mounted their horses and rode back toward home. Toward the ranch with its sturdy house and good land. Toward the family waiting for them, the children and grandchildren who were their legacy. Toward the life they had built together, one choice, one moment, one day at a time. Behind them, the river continued its eternal journey, carrying water from the mountains to the plains, indifferent to the human stories that played out along its banks. But for Yates and Annabel Montgomery, that river would always be the beginning of everything, the place where a drifting cowboy became a man with roots, and a drowning woman found someone who would hold on and never let go. They rode home together as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for 25 years of marriage, of love, of building a life worth living. And if the universe had any say in it, those same stars would watch over them for many years more. Two souls who had found each other in the chaos of a raging river and decided to make a life together in the wild, beautiful territory of Wyoming. Years continued their steady march, bringing both joy and the inevitable sorrows of a long life. Clara married at 20, choosing a young rancher from Colorado who shared her passion for horses and wide open spaces. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to the Montgomery Ranch, expanding the family holdings and ensuring that Clara could stay close to home while building her own legacy. Young Samuel, showing his mother's head for numbers and his father's work ethic, took over more of the store's operations as Thomas focused on expanding into freight and shipping. By 1905, the Montgomery business interests had grown beyond what Yates had ever imagined. That first day Samuel Pierce had offered him a job. But success, Yates had learned, was measured in more than money and land. It was measured in Sunday dinners with 3 generations gathered around one table, in grandchildren who climbed into his lap demanding stories. In the way, Annabel still reached for his hand in the night, in quiet moments watching the sun set over land that was theirs. In 1908, Yates turned 59, and Annabel organized a celebration that brought people from all over the state. Former cowboys he had worked with, townspeople whose lives he had touched, business associates who respected him, and most importantly, his family. As he looked around at the gathering, at the proof of a life well lived, Yates felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the guests had departed, and the grandchildren were tucked into various beds around the house, Yates and Annabel walked out to the porch. It was their ritual, this quiet time at the end of the day, and neither of them could imagine life without it. 31 years, Annabel said, settling into the chair beside his. 31 years since the river. Best 31 years of my life. The only ones that mattered, really. Annabel took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had ridden past that day? If you had not heard me, or had decided it was too dangerous to jump in? I try not to. It is too terrible to contemplate. I would have been alone, still drifting, still convinced that I did not deserve anything good. I would have missed everything that makes life worth living. I would have drowned, Annabel said simply. The current had me. I could not have fought it much longer. You gave me life, Yates. Everything that came after, everything I have experienced and built and loved, I owe to you. Yates shook his head. We gave each other life. Real life, not just existence. You gave me a reason to stay, to build, to love. You taught me that I could have good things, that I deserved them. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild laughed at something, the sound bright and carefree. In the distance, horses nickered in the barn. The wind carried the scent of sage and grass and home. I love you, Annabel said, the words as necessary as breath even after all these years. I have loved you since that first day, I think. Since I opened my eyes on that riverbank and saw you looking at me like I was something precious. You are precious. You are everything. Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I love you more than I have words to express. You are my heart, Annabel. You always have been. The years ahead would bring more changes, as years always did. There would be more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. There would be losses, too, friends and contemporaries passing on, the inevitable march of time taking its toll. But through it all, Yates and Annabel would face everything together, their love the constant foundation on which everything else was built. In 1915, on a beautiful September morning exactly 39 years after Yates had pulled Annabel from the Laramie River, they gathered their entire family for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and now 3 great-grandchildren filled the ranch house to bursting. They told the story again, the story that had become family legend, of the cowboy and the drowning woman and the moment that changed everything. The youngest great-grandchild, a boy of 3 named Yates after his great-grandfather, climbed into the old cowboy's lap. Tell it again, Great Papa. Tell about the river. Yates, now 66 with silver hair and weathered skin that spoke of decades under the Wyoming sun, settled the boy more comfortably and began the tale. He had told it hundreds of times, but it never got old. How he had been camped by the river, planning to ride on to Cheyenne. How he had heard the splash and seen the woman in the water, being swept away by the current. How he had jumped in without thinking, driven by instinct and something else, something he could not name then but understood now as fate. And when I grabbed her, Yates said, smiling at Annabel across the crowded room, I said, I've got you, don't let go. And she held on tight and we fought that river together and we made it to the bank. And then you fell in love, young Yates said, having heard the story enough times to know how it went. And then we fell in love, Yates confirmed. the deepest, truest love there is. The kind that lasts forever. Tell him the best part, Annabel prompted, her eyes twinkling. The best part is that we are still in love. 39 years later, and I love your great-grandmother more today than I did that day by the river. And tomorrow I will love her even more. That is how real love works. It just keeps growing. The little boy seemed satisfied with this, and he scrambled down to go play with his cousins. But the adults in the room understood what Yates and Annabel had created. It was not just a business empire or a successful ranch or even a large family. It was a legacy of love, of choosing each other every day, of building something lasting from a single moment of courage and connection. As evening fell and the family began to disperse to their various homes, Thomas pulled his father aside. He was 46 now, a successful businessman and father himself, with the first threads of silver in his own hair. "Papa, I want you to know something. Every decision I make, every time I wonder if I am doing right by my family, I think of you and Mama. I think about how you built all this from nothing, how you loved each other through everything. You gave us the best example of what a marriage should be, what a family should be. Thank you for that." Yates embraced his son, emotions tight in his throat. "You have built your own life, son. Your own legacy. I am proud of the man you have become. I became this man because of what you taught me. You showed me that where you come from does not matter nearly as much as what you do with the chances you are given. You were a drifter with nothing, and you became the best man I know." After Thomas left, Yates stood on the porch watching the last of the evening light fade from the sky. Annabel joined him, slipping her arm through his, and they stood together in the gathering darkness. "We did all right, didn't we?" Yates said softly. "We did better than all right. We did wonderful." They went inside together, to the bedroom they had shared for decades, and prepared for sleep. It was a comfortable routine, one they had performed thousands of times, but it never lost its significance. The simple act of choosing to share a bed with someone, night after night, year after year, was its own kind of miracle. As they lay together in the darkness, Annabel's head on Yates's chest, his arm around her shoulders, they talked quietly about the day, about the family, about plans for the future. It was how they had ended nearly every day of their marriage, this quiet communion that bound them together as surely as any vow. "I hope we have many more years," Annabel said. "I am not ready to be done with you yet." "Many more years," Yates agreed. "I plan on loving you well into the next century if I can manage it. That is a long time. Not long enough. I could have 1,000 years with you and it would not be enough." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had survived a raging river, built a life from nothing, raised children, and watched grandchildren grow. They had loved each other through easy times and hard, through success and struggle, through joy and sorrow. And through it all, from that first moment when Yates had said, "I have got you, don't let go," neither of them had ever loosened their grip. They had held on through everything, and they would continue to hold on for as long as breath remained in their bodies. The decades of the early 20th century brought enormous changes to Wyoming and to the nation. The wild frontier that Yates and Annabel had known in their youth was giving way to a more settled, civilized world. Automobiles began to appear on the streets of Laramie, though Yates never fully trusted them and preferred his horses until the end. The world became smaller as communication improved, but the essential rhythms of life on the ranch remained much the same. In 1920, Wyoming made national news when women gained the right to vote, though women in Wyoming had actually held that right since territorial days. Annabel, now 67, proudly cast her ballot, thinking of all the changes she had witnessed in her lifetime. That year also brought sadness, as Clara's husband passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Clara, strong like her mother, grieved deeply but carried on, running the ranch they had built together and raising their children to value hard work and integrity. Yates and Annabel supported her through the loss, drawing on their own strength and the bonds of family that had always sustained them. As Yates moved into his 70s, he gradually slowed down, allowing his children and grandchildren to take over more of the daily operations. But he never fully retired, never stopped being involved in the businesses and the ranch. He was too much a part of it all, his identity too intertwined with the work he had done for so many years. But his true joy, his real focus in those later years, was Annabel. They had always been close, always prioritized their relationship, but in their 70s they seemed to exist in a bubble of their own making, content just to be together. They would sit on the porch for hours, hands clasped, not needing words. They would take slow walks around the property, pointing out changes and remembering how things used to be. They would lie in bed at night, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in a way that only decades of intimacy could create. On a clear September morning in 1925, exactly 49 years after the day they met, Yates woke early and watched Annabel sleep. She was 72 now, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him, her hair silver white, her hands spotted and gnarled with arthritis but still capable of so much love. He watched the gentle rise and fall of her breathing and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for every single day they had been given. When she woke and found him watching her, she smiled. "Good morning, my love. Good morning. Happy anniversary. 49 years since the river. 47 years of marriage. Where did the time go? Into building this life, into loving each other. It went exactly where it should have." They rose and dressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces, another ritual of age and love. Downstairs, the family was already gathering for the celebration they had planned, but Yates and Annabel took their time. They had earned the right to move at their own pace. The party was smaller than previous celebrations, more intimate. Many of their contemporaries had passed on, and they were increasingly surrounded by younger generations who knew their story only as family legend. But the love was the same, the respect and admiration for what they had built, what they represented. Thomas, now 56, stood to make a toast. "To my parents, who have shown us all what real love looks like. You have given us an example that we can only hope to follow. You taught us that commitment is a choice you make every day, that love is both a feeling and an action, and that family is everything. Thank you for building this legacy. Thank you for showing us the way." Glasses were raised, and Yates felt Annabel's hand squeeze his under the table. He looked at her, saw tears in her eyes that matched his own, and knew that every sacrifice, every hard day, every moment of doubt had been worth it for this. For the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built together. As autumn gave way to winter that year, Yates began to feel his age more acutely. His joints ached in the cold, his energy flagged earlier in the day, his breathing sometimes came hard. He tried to hide it from Annabel, not wanting to worry her, but she knew him too well. "You need to see the doctor," she insisted one evening when she found him struggling for breath after climbing the stairs. "I am just old, Anna. Doctors cannot fix that." "Maybe not, but they can make you more comfortable. Please, for me." He went, because he could never refuse her anything, and the doctor confirmed what Yates had already known. His heart was giving out, worn down by 76 years of life, most of them spent in hard physical labor. There were medicines that might help, but the prognosis was clear. He had months, maybe a year if he was lucky. Yates took the news with the same calm acceptance he had brought to everything in his life. He had lived far longer than most men of his generation, and he had lived well. He had no complaints. His only regret was that he would have to leave Annabel behind, and that thought was almost more than he could bear. He told her that evening, sitting in their bedroom, holding her hands. He watched her face crumple with grief, saw the tears spill down her cheeks, and gathered her into his arms. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "No, you cannot leave me. I am not ready." "I am not ready either, love, but we do not always get to choose these things." "How long?" "Months. Maybe less, maybe more. But Anna, listen to me. We have had 49 years. 49 incredible years that I never thought I would get. Most men would give everything for even 1 year of what we have had. We have been so blessed. I don't want to lose you." She was sobbing now, clinging to him, and Yates held her tight, his own tears falling into her silver hair. "You will never lose me. I will always be with you in everything we built, in our children, in every memory we made. Love like ours does not end just because one of us is gone. It goes on forever." They held each other for a long time, mourning the future they would not have while trying to be grateful for the past they had shared. Eventually, Annabel pulled herself together, wiping her eyes and lifting her chin with the strength Yates had always admired. "Then we make the most of the time we have left. No wasting a single moment. No regrets." "No regrets," Yates agreed. They told the family together, and the grief was palpable. But along with the sadness was gratitude and a determination to make Yates's remaining time meaningful. The children and grandchildren visited more frequently. Meals became celebrations. Every day was treated as the gift it was. Yates spent his remaining months doing the things he loved most. He rode out on the ranch with his children and grandchildren, though the rides became shorter as his strength waned. He sat with the great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about Texas and the war, and drifting through the West. He worked in the store when he felt up to it, enjoying the familiar rhythm of commerce and conversation, but mostly he was with Annabel. They spent hours together, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, always touching, always connected. They looked through old photographs and remembered younger days. They talked about their life together, about the choices they had made, about the love that had sustained them through everything. "I would not change anything," Yates said one evening in early spring of 1926. They were on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the sun set. "Even knowing how it ends, I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard parts, the losses and struggles, especially not those. They made us who we are, they taught us what matters. And they make the good parts even sweeter because we know how easily it could have been different." Annabel leaned against him, careful of his fragile state. "I love you, Yates Montgomery. I have loved you from the moment you pulled me from that river. I will love you until I take my last breath, and if there is anything after that, I will love you there too. I love you too, Anna. You are my heart. You always have been." As spring progressed, Yates grew weaker. The simple act of getting out of bed became a monumental effort. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Annabel never wavered. She rarely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside the bed when he could no longer manage the stairs, holding his hand through the pain, whispering words of love and comfort. On a morning in late May, as sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, Yates woke to find Annabel watching him. She was holding his hand, her grip still strong despite her own age and arthritis. "Anna," he whispered, his voice weak. "I am here, my love. I have got you." The words echoed across nearly 50 years, back to that moment in the river when he had said them to her. Yates smiled, understanding that the circle was closing, that they were finding their way back to the beginning. "Don't let go," he whispered. "Never. I will never let go." He closed his eyes, still feeling her hand in his, still surrounded by her love. His breathing slowed, became peaceful, and then, gently, stopped. Annabel held his hand for a long time after he was gone, not ready to release him, not ready to face a world without Yates Montgomery in it. But eventually, Thomas came and gently guided her away, and the family began the process of saying goodbye to the man who had built their legacy. They buried Yates on the hillside overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he could see the land he had helped build and the home he had made with Annabel. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact he had made in his 50 years in Laramie. Annabel stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and spoke the words she needed to say. "You gave me life twice. Once when you pulled me from the river, and again when you taught me what real love was. You kept your promise, Yates. You never let go, and neither will I. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." In the months that followed, Annabel grieved deeply but with grace. She was surrounded by family, by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were the proof of the love she and Yates had shared. She found comfort in the ranch, in the store, in all the places they had been together. And she found comfort in knowing that their love story, beginning with a moment of crisis in a raging river, had become something that would outlast them both. She lived for 4 more years, staying active and involved in the family businesses, watching great-grandchildren grow and great-great-grandchildren be born. She told the story of the river often, making sure that future generations knew how it all began, how a drifting cowboy and a drowning woman found each other and built something lasting. On a peaceful evening in September of 1930, exactly 54 years after the day Yates pulled her from the river, Annabel Pierce Montgomery passed away in her sleep. She was 77 years old, surrounded by family photographs and the memories of a life well lived and deeply loved. They buried her beside Yates, finally reunited after 4 years apart. On the shared headstone, Thomas had inscribed the words that had started it all. "I have got you. Don't let go." The family gathered on that hillside, 4 generations strong, and remembered the couple who had built their legacy. They told the story again, the story that had become legend, about the river and the rescue and the love that followed. And as the sun set over Wyoming, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, it seemed fitting that 2 people who had loved so deeply, who had built so much from a single moment of courage and connection, should rest together overlooking the land they had made their own. Their story lived on in their descendants, in the businesses they had built, in the community they had helped shape. But more than that, it lived on as proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That sometimes you have to jump into dangerous waters to find what really matters. That real love, the kind that lasts, starts with a choice to hold on and never let go. And in the years and decades that followed, whenever members of the Montgomery family faced difficult decisions or hard times, they would remember Yates and Annabel. They would remember that love was both a feeling and a choice, made new each day. They would remember that commitment meant showing up, holding on, refusing to let go even when it would be easier to drift away. The ranch and the store continued to prosper under new generations of management. The family grew and branched, spreading across Wyoming and beyond. But they always came back to Laramie, to the hillside where Yates and Annabel rested, to remember where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet September mornings when the light was just right, you could almost see them there on the hillside. A cowboy and his lady, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had loved and the legacy they had built, together forever in the place they had made their home. The river still flows through Wyoming, careless and eternal, carrying water from the mountains to the plains. But for the Montgomery family, that river will always be more than water and stone. It will always be the beginning of everything, the place where love triumphed over fear, where two souls found each other in the chaos and decided to build a life together. It will always be the place where a cowboy dove in and said, "I have got you, don't let go," and where a woman held on tight and found her forever.